Well, Carey, I'm excited to chat with you today. I'm excited to have you as a guest of the Impact Driven Leader podcast and excited to talk about your book, At Your Best. But before we get there, I'd love for maybe some audience members that don't know who Carey Nieuwhof is. I don't know how they could be with. There's, 1.5 million people, as it's reported, consume your content every month, which just blows my mind. Would love to just share a little bit more about you from your heart.
Well, that leaves about 8 billion people who don't. So let's just assume a lot of people have no idea who I am. But thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm a lot of formers. Currently, what I do, let's start it that way. I'm a former pastor. I'm a former lawyer. But basically, I'm an author. I lead a communications company, and we're devoted. We get up every day trying to help people thrive in life and leadership. And as you know, life is hard. Leadership can be have its own set of difficulties. So what we try to do is to produce resources that really help leaders in a variety of circumstances: church leaders, business leaders, entrepreneurs, motivated stay-at-home parents. I mean, you name it. If you've got a little bit, like if you might have bought 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if you're that kind of person, if you're a podcast listener, if you're trying to say, how do I get an edge, or how do I, that's what we do all day. So that's been a real joy. I have a small team that helps me do that. And prior to that, I led a church for 2 decades. And before that, I thought I was going to spend my life in law. And that, finished that, but got called out of it into ministry. So that's a little bit of the background. The great joy of my life, I'm married to my wife, Tony. We've been married for over 30 years. We have 2 grown sons, and just love. I live north of Toronto. We just love it up here. Hosted a whole group of leaders that came up, flew from all over the U.S. to be with me in my backyard for a day. And it's just, it's a good seasonal life, and really enjoying things right now. And I write books in my spare time.
Yeah, well, I understand that and appreciate that. One of the best things that I gather there is, one, leadership, it doesn't matter where you're at, is all about people. You talk about that, a lot of your content is understanding, hey, we're just people, but your focus is your wife. And I think there's probably some trying times in your career. As I speak for myself, I'll be married 16 years here later this month. There's some ups and downs. You have 2 kids, I have 3, where sometimes those core relationships, when they're at their best, means that you're best. But sometimes when we're at our worst, those relationships can get our worst as well. I'd love for you to just kind of, as we're talking about your book, At Your Best, as you're talking about this overall arch of leadership, I'd love to just kind of start there. Something that you realized through that process in your life, how it led to kind of what you're doing, but also this book, At Your Best.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, Tony and the kids have seen me at my worst, as have some of my team, for sure. I mean, leadership is hard and life is hard. And we all have moments that we're not proud of. We all have things that happen where, I was in a season where I was trying to lead and I wasn't at my best. So it's sort of a before and after. I think my life operates a little bit on a hinge point, my adult life. So about 15 years ago, after 10 years, I've been in leadership about, close to 30 years. I've been an adult. And 15 years ago, I burned out. I had a decade in leadership where everything was up and to the right. I was leading a church at the time. We were growing. And of course, for any church leader listening or people involved in church, you really believe in the mission. It's really hard to disentangle yourself from what you do, because I'm a Christian, but I'm also leading people to Christ. I'm also a pastor. So that becomes super challenging. And, my response to the growth was not particularly healthy. I just said more people equals more hours, and that doesn't scale. So it got me burned out after about a decade. And, I look back on my leadership when I was in my 30s, and I wasn't, there wasn't a trail of bodies everywhere, but we were growing faster than we were losing people. Let's just put it that way, okay? So that you can get away with that for a while. But I look back on that and go, wow, we were moving so hard and so fast that it took a toll on me, but also took a toll on a lot of people, some team members, some staff, some people. And, not like headline worthy stuff, but just like there was a churn going on, and there was definitely a churn going on in me. that led me to burnout. I'm like, wow, that was so painful for me. I thought, I can't live that way in the future. And if you've ever burned out, you realize, wow, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. And so I felt that way, and I thought, I've got to figure out a different way to live. So I did recover from burnout, which I'm very grateful for to this day. Not everybody gets out of it, but I got out of it. And then I spent 3 to 5 years trying to figure out, okay, how can I live differently? Because living the way I was living got me burned out and was not, we had good results, but when you really look back on it, it's like, yeah, there was some churn and there was some collateral damage there that doesn't need to happen. And so I developed a whole new approach through coaching and counseling that I used personally for a few years and felt a lot better. There was a lot less collateral damage. We continued to grow, but it was a much healthier growth. And I never thought it would become a book. I thought it was just a personal system I had for myself. And then people started asking me in droves, like, how are you getting everything accomplished? And I would answer it anecdotally. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I got invited to do a talk with Mark Batterson in DC. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll try to turn some of these principles and just see if they resonate with anyone else. And it was an instant kind of moment where everyone's like, my goodness, this is gold. Mark said, Carey, you got to put it into a book. I first launched it as a course that I used to call the High Impact Leader, ran a couple thousand people through it. And I'm like, oh, these principles work. Like, they're not just idiosyncratic. They're not just for me. And then kept revising the ideas, refining the ideas, expanding the ideas. And now they're in a book form called At Your Best. So the goal is to help people get time, energy, and priorities working for them. It's been encouraging. Book's been out about 3 weeks. So we're getting messages every day from people who are saying, I'm seeing instant results in productivity, margin, peace, rest in my life. And I'm like, yeah, like, that's fantastic. That's why we released the book. So that's what it's all about.
Okay. So you gave me a lot of things to think about. Hopefully everyone listening in too. I made a lot of notes. It kind of coincides with a lot of notes I had beforehand. But you hit on a couple things that I think are imperative. And I want you to start with this for our audience. If you could you describe some of the symptoms, or when you burnt out, what did that look like? Like, how did you feel? What symptoms did you have, so people maybe can relate to that part of it?
Yeah, for me, I had a pretty, in the burnout period itself, which lasted about maybe 4 to 6 months in the summer of 2006, started in the late spring, started to get better by September, October of that year. There were a lot of symptoms. Like, I probably had pre-symptoms. So prior to burning out, I was kind of tired all the time, sort of numb, not feeling great, but I'm an Enneagram 8 and I will plow through that brick wall, like, just get out of the way. And then when I burned out, it's like my body said, it broke up with me and said, we're not doing this anymore. Like, it just went on strike. It quit, which shocked me because I was always able to push through everything. So what was that characterized by? When the burnout hit in earnest, it was low energy. Like, very low energy. We all have a little window a day where we get a little tired, right? But I would wake up feeling like I hadn't even slept the day before. And I got out of bed, but it was miserable. Even more alarmingly than that, my passion was gone. I did not feel passionate about ministry. I didn't feel I never lost my faith. It wasn't a deconversion story. I still intellectually believed in what I believed in, but I didn't have any passion for it. It's like I just didn't care. And I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about my marriage. I didn't care about my parenting. I didn't care about my life. I didn't care about fun. I didn't care about ministry. I just kind of went numb. Mostly I did not experience emotions. And when I did, they were wrong. So, you're supposed to be happy when other people are happy. You're supposed to be sad when people are sad. And it wasn't cause and effect anymore. So I didn't feel that. And then when my emotions would surface, it would usually be anger, and it was over something I necessarily shouldn't have been angry about. You know, my 10-year-old didn't take out the garbage. It's like, okay, you shouldn't have a nuclear meltdown over that, but I was. Yeah. I was self-medicating. For me, it wasn't alcohol or drugs. It was just overworking or overeating. So that was a challenge. Another symptom was that sleep and rest did not refuel me. I'm like a control freak. So I'm like, okay, I don't feel good. I'm going to take 3 weeks off. I had 3 weeks off scheduled in July of 2006. I'm like, I will be, running Ironman by the time I'm done the 3 weeks off. And I didn't get better. I got worse. And that's when I realized I have no control over this. And it was brutal. And so those were some of the symptoms.
I love that. So I've, experienced burnout with people in my life. In your book, you kind of threw a non-official survey I heard you kick out where there's 93% of people feel like they've burnt out, and then 7% are like, what is this? And I think that's very telling, but I think there's information there to wonder as a leader. And ultimately, I'm hoping through this conversation we answer the question, as a leader, how can we recognize burnout in ourselves and or others and help be a part of the solution? And so as I'm thinking of this, I've seen my wife burn out. And one of the things that hit me there, and this is what I believed, and I'd love your take on this, is I believe there's two ways that people end up burning out. And I think there's a combination a little bit, but it's taking on too much or doing things that we feel ill-equipped to do and having this responsibility. I'm the only one to do it. And I think there can be a combination. That's what I've seen in my life, people that have burnt out. What I gathered from you, kind of that, we're hyper growth. I'm taking on all of this. And I'd love for you to just kind of break that down a little bit, what your thoughts are there, or, kind of what can lead people into that. To me, it's a responsibility that sometimes leads to burnout. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Those are good insights, Tyler. For sure, if you're not in your lane, if you're not working in the area of your giftedness, that is going to produce some malaise in your life and feelings of burnout. What's interesting is, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, so this is like the amateur guy. But I have worked with thousands of leaders who have burned out, so I have a few data points. It would be interesting, like you could be out of alignment in your job, but then if you're going home, are you still having fun? Are you enjoying time with your family? It's just work life is bad? Well, that could be like work burnout. But I find for a lot of people, burnout was a term developed in the 1970s to describe what physicians were dealing with, which is they were just exhausted from like long hours and everything. But I'm finding, so burnout historically has been a work term, but I think it's morphing into a life term. And so a lot of the people that I work with, it might be that their job isn't really in their lane, but they kind of feel like their life is out of control. They're overwhelmed, overcommitted, and overworked. And so in that 93% that you referenced, I was at a conference in Dallas. This was probably in 2019, I think. I was speaking live, and the hosts wanted me to do an instant poll. And the question was how many of you have experienced symptoms of burnout in the last year? And I expected 30%, 40% of people to chip in and say, yeah, that was me. But when 93% said that they did, it just stopped me in my tracks. And then you look at other data, 70% of millennials say they've experienced symptoms of burnout in the last 2 years. There was a Deloitte study in 2021, 83% of executives go home exhausted every day, and 59% can't sleep at night because of the stress that they're facing. So I think what's happened is, to your second condition, I think is right, that we live at this unsustainable pace. We're just at the point where we are going so fast because it's not just work. Work could be demanding and exhausting, but then you got life. And you got to drive the kids to different events, and you've got this thing happening on the weekend with your family, and you want to go to this concert, and then you want to go here, and you've got 17 unread text messages, and you got all these emails that are clogging up your inbox, and everywhere you look, someone is asking you for something. And there are times when I haven't been in a healthy season of life, and I'm like, I'm just tired of everybody asking for a piece of me. Like everybody wants a piece of me. And I think that I would define as an unsustainable pace. And I think you can easily end up feeling overwhelmed and burned out when you're living at an unsustainable pace.
Yeah. One of the things that I gather here, and I think happens, and, as a leader, a parent, you kind of hit on this age, range. And as I'm 42, my kids are 15 through 12. And, 10 years ago, it was crazy. My wife, it was a crazy season. And I think one of the things that I really pick up and I see and I wonder is we have to give ourselves grace through some of those seasons to understand the best thing we can do is just move forward today and not worry about how can we climb Mount Everest from a career point of view, if that makes sense. And I think it's hard because sometimes opportunities come at us, and it's how do we say yes to what's important and no to all the things that aren't. And you give some kind of tools, some framework within your book to kind of think through some of those things. I'd love for you to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, it probably should be seasonally adjusted. Like, I did not start writing books until I was around your age. And part of that was it was just crazy. Like, I didn't know how to control my time. But yeah, saying no is really, really, really important and very difficult for people. I'm going to guess that most people listening to this podcast have more opportunities than they have time available, whether that's on their social calendar, stuff the kids are doing. And a couple of ways to get out of that perpetual state of overwhelm and to stop letting other people hijack your priorities is I would suggest what people should do is start making categorical decisions. So rather famously, like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, kind of wear the same thing every day, the t-shirt, or in Jobs' case, it was the mock turtleneck and the khakis, that kind of thing. And you're like, these guys do not have a wardrobe budget problem. Like they could buy whatever they wanted and have a custom tailor at their house every morning to make them a new set of clothes. Why would they do something like that? And the reason is Einstein did the same thing, is it's one less decision I have to make.
Yep.
I don't have to stand there in my closet going, what am I going to wear? What do my people want me to wear? What do the cameras want me to wear? It's like I just wear the same thing every day. It's like a lot of people who are very good at time management will eat the same thing for breakfast every day, the same thing for lunch every day. Why? One less decision. So I call that categorical decision making. And one of the things you can do if you find yourself overwhelmed is just decide, all right, there are certain things I'm just not going to do for a season or forever. So, for example, when on the other side of burnout, I discovered that I was probably at my best in the morning, but I was also the king of breakfast meetings. So the thing that moved the needle for the last 2 or 3 decades of my life is I'm a content creator. I'm writing messages for a weekend church service, or these days I'm writing chapters for books, or I'm writing an article for my website, or I'm prepping for an interview. I'm also a podcaster like you. And I only have a few peak hours in a day, like 3 to 5 peak hours in a day. And if I go to breakfast meetings day after day, by the time I get into the office at 9 or 9:30, and then people want to talk to me, and then I got all these unread messages, like my best hours, my most productive hours are already spent. 4:30 rolls around, I've still got to write that chapter. I've still got to get stuff done. And so what I did was I made a categorical decision years ago that I was just going to stop doing breakfast meetings or severely limit them. And so I rarely do a breakfast meeting now. Now, will I meet with you in the afternoon? Sure, but I'm not at my best anymore. Well, what that does is that allows me to free up some time in the morning to get those big rocks moved, to get those really critical things finished, so that by 10 or 11 a.m. most days, I've checked off the massive things off my list. And that's categorical decision making. Other things you can do, I'm a speaker. I do a lot of speaking engagements. So we say no, ironically, to about 90% of the requests that come our way. And that's tough. But my team and I have developed filters. And we tried to figure out, okay, I'd rather speak to leaders than just a general crowd. And then there's specific types of leaders. So almost rather than looking at every decision like it was fresh, because that leads to decision fatigue, it's like, okay, well, we already know the filters we're going to run these speaking requests through. And if they meet those criteria, then yeah, we'll definitely have a look at it. And most of them don't. So I would start thinking, I have a friend, she was over today. She works on my staff, but she's got 3 kids too. They're all under 5 and, limited finances, that kind of thing. And she just decided, because her life was so crazy, she wasn't going to do those like essential oil parties and that kind of thing, because she gets a million requests from her friends. And she's like, hey, I'm just not going to those right now. I'll be happy to get together with you for a cup of tea or something like that, or a drink later, but I just don't do parties like that in the season. So I would encourage you to think through categories. Another example from when our kids were younger, Both were athletic and both were musical. But we said, no matter how athletic and how musical you are, you get one sport per season, you get one music lesson per season. We only had 2 kids. Other people have like 8. It's like, I don't know how they do it. But that was enough for us because that would put us out of the house 4 days a week after school or in the evenings. And we figured that was a bandwidth. Another categorical decision for us is Friday night is date night. We almost never break that. And you just put that on the calendar. So you start to program health in that way. And you know, if you ask me for a breakfast meeting, it's like, I'm sorry, Tyler, I'm just not available.
Yeah. Well,
you see how that makes it a little easier.
So that is and I know he's a friend of yours, Craig Rochelle, has talked about this in his life. And what's funny is you see me wearing a black T-shirt is at the start of COVID, March of 2020, on Zoom and on Facebook Live and doing these things. I'm like, I don't want to have to worry about figure out this 5 minutes. What am I going to wear that I didn't wear yesterday that's not going to – so I just black T-shirts. And that's what I wear every single day. And it drives my wife nuts. But it's just like I don't want to have to think about it. And even just the freedom of it. So I found a brand of black shirt that I love. And I think as you bring that up, it's those decisions that we may think are weird that jobs or other people have done. But when then you understand how much brain capacity some of those little things can take to free it up to what you're best at. And that's what I love you sharing that I think is so imperative. Yeah. Go ahead, Gary.
And that's science too, right? Like we think of ourselves as robots. A lot of us think like, I'm superhuman. I can do everything. I can do it all. I think we're kind of like our phones. You start at 100% and then the battery starts to meet down little by minute, just ticks down. And by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're at 42%. And by 5 o'clock, we might be at 28%. Mm-hmm. Like, often, if I'm doing a late day meeting, I'll just say to my team, I have 3 brain cells left. So how do you want to use them? And, that's a very counterintuitive thing. But then that starts to work for you when you realize, wow, this is like if you have $100 left in your bank account, you're going to spend it differently. Yeah. Than if it's like, well, it'll just replenish itself or I'll just rack up credit card debt. You got $100 left. How are you going to spend it? Well, you start to think strategically. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get into energy management, not just time management, right? Because you get 24 equal hours in a day, but they don't all feel equal. So for me, I'm at my best in the morning. I've got to treasure those hours. Like you, I don't want to be making stupid decisions every morning that I can avoid, because if I've got to write some really great content, I know that I've probably got 3 to 5 peak productive hours in me. I'm only going to feel at my best till about 11 a.m. and then it's kind of downhill from there. And if you're a night owl, like flip it. Okay, in the evening you come alive, great. But you're not going to be alive till 5 o'clock the next morning. Mm-hmm. Like at some point, your wick is going to snuff out and you're going to be like, well, that's it for me. And I think people don't think about it. I mean, they know it, but they don't really think about it. And then they don't program their lives around their energy levels. And that's why they struggle so much. One of the reasons they struggle so much with overwhelm. So good for you. That's a great decision.
So I want to transition here a little bit. One of the topics that you bring up in your book, At Your Best, is this flat learning curve. The flat learning curve people. And I really love it. And I threw this kind of ideology onto the end of it. And this is my belief, is our job as a leader is not to guide everyone, but it is to find who can. So in other words, right. If I am leading you, and this comes back into that delegation and this whole idea of this kind of topic of burnout, which I'd love to dig into more in some of our insecurities, but it's like my role as a leader is not to be everything to everyone. But right. My role as a leader is to say, hey, Carey, I'm not the guy for you, but let me go find the person who is. And let me connect you with Brad because he's your guy. And you know what? I'm part of that solution, and therefore I am leading you. I find that a lot of leaders struggle with that. Or, inexperienced leaders, new leaders, maybe new in a position, because there's this insecurity of feeling like, oh, if I pass on that I'm abdicating my position. So could you dig into that a little bit?
So the flat learning curve is a real challenge to me, because if you think about how I used to spend my time, how a lot of people spend their time, it's with their lowest performers. So, for example, if you have someone who's perpetually late, they miss all the meetings, they're 10 minutes late, everyone's supposed to be in the office theoretically at 8 a.m. and they always roll in at 8:15. You're like, I got to meet with Nieuwhof here and tell him hey, you got to show up on time for these things, okay? And what a lot of us discover, whether it's the salesperson who keeps missing targets, the person who's always late in time, the person who never gets the report done, the person who misses their quotas, whatever it is those are never once and done meetings. It's like the guy who's like, okay, I sat down, talked to him, like, don't be late. Then he's late tomorrow. Okay, I got to bring him in. I got to talk to him again. Or the drama king or the drama queen. Like, you ever notice we've all got that one person in our life who has the crisis of the day, the crisis of the month. It's like, okay, well, you solved that one problem, but now you've got 5 new ones and you want to talk all day to me about it. And John Townsend, the psychologist, says that those people have flat learning curves because me investing an hour of my time in trying to make you on time is not helping you be on time. If it does, that was a one-time meeting and it's over. But a lot of us, like if you look at the time we spend meeting with people, it's with the, the drama king who's got like yet another problem that he can't solve and needs our advice. But our advice last time didn't really help him. So what do you do with that? My suggestion is you stop meeting with that person. And that might sound really hard and tough. And if you're a person of faith, maybe even unchristian, but that's okay because think about it. Are they being helped by your interaction with them? The answer is no, because they're still late. They're still missing all their quotas. They've still got drama in their life every day. So clearly, as you said, I am not the person who's going to be able to help that person. And if I am, I don't know how to do it. So I'm not helping them and they are not being helped by it. So they, just say, I either need to let you go or we're going to tolerate this, but I'm not going to be the person that's coaching you on this stuff anymore. So take those meetings out of your life because you're not helping the serial offenders. And then what you should do is spend your time with the people who deliver 80% of your results. So you have that one top salesperson who never bugs you, who's always on time, who's smashing her quotas, and call her up and say, hey, do you want to go for a lunch on Thursday? And she'd be like, I'd love to. That would be fantastic. And how are those meetings? Energizing. They're great. And you should be meeting with your top performers. You should be meeting with your best people because that leaves them energized. It leaves you more aligned with them, and it leaves you feeling energized. Meanwhile, all those people you weren't helping are now not being helped by somebody else. So that kind of frees up your time, and it makes your meeting schedule and your meeting rhythm a lot more energizing.
Is that's something obviously I can tell that you've learned through? Did it take a while to learn through that? And what really allowed you to learn it and be free with, hey, I'm not the guy for everybody?
Well, I think like 700 attempts to be the guy for everyone and realizing none of them have really worked out probably helped with realizing, okay, and then really good counsel from people like Townsend and Cloud and others, and just talking to leaders. I spent a lot of time talking to top leaders, and I'm realizing I'm not really helping anybody. And then some of those people, I still know them. They're still friends, but there'll be a new crisis next month. And I don't have to wade in up to my chin every time there's a crisis because for whatever reason, they enjoy living that way. I don't enjoy living that way. It is not the most valuable spend of my time. I'm not helping. And every time I'm trying to help that person, I am not helping hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of other people I could be helping if I invested my time in another way. So I think it's a boundary issue, and you just have to say, I'm really sorry you're having these challenges, but I'm not free to meet with you about that.
One of the topics that I've heard you discuss and you share personally, and this is my personal belief, it's what I've had to overcome the most is my personal insecurity as a leader, as just a person. And I'd love to hear maybe thoughts how you see, whether personally or within others, that insecurity can be a factor to burnout. It's trying to feel like I'm enough or cover up these supposed holes we feel we have in our self. I'd love for you to kind of wade through that. What are your thoughts there, and how have you seen that in yourself or others?
Yeah, Tyler, that's a very perceptive connection. I do think they're related. I hadn't really thought about that explicitly. But if you're insecure, you are probably more likely to work extra hours, to try to say, well, I have to be the solution for everything and everybody and every situation. And I think, I struggle with insecurity like most people do. You're either insecure or you're a narcissist. So I hope I struggle with insecurity rather than being a narcissist. But I'd say it's less of an issue now than it was 20 years ago in my life. And what that has allowed me to do is to accept my limits. Like, I'm okay with my limits. I know I'm not a robot. I had people at my house last night till 11:30, and we didn't get to bed until after midnight. And it was a great day. It was an 11-hour hosting of a half dozen leaders who flew in from across the U.S. to hang out for the day. So it was really good. It was like a mastermind. But I didn't get to bed until 12:30 this morning. I let myself sleep in till 7:30, 20 to 8. I took a relatively easy morning because I had an 11 a.m. meeting. I have this. I have a few things after that. I have a podcast later in the afternoon. I'm like, to be fresh for that, I need to be prepared. And I also realize I am bad at most things in life. Like, I really am. I have such a narrow gifting. It's so small. But if I stick in my lane, I'm a communicator. I can express ideas in writing. I'm a decent interviewer. I can interview people. Okay, well, that's what I'm good at. And for the rest, I'm really not good at most things in life. It was even like dinner last night. The old me would have tried to do everything. The new me, I had everything catered except the meat because I know how to run the big green egg. I know how to do that. So I got a nice tenderloin. We sliced it up. Everyone enjoyed it. I had the rest of the meal catered. Why? Because you wouldn't want to eat my bread. You don't want my vegetables. Like, they're terrible. But I have this little tiny lane. And I think that's the security of knowing, yeah, I'm not good at most things. And I'm probably never going to run a triathlon. But that's okay. And probably one of the most instrumental teachings on that for me, Andy Stanley said this years ago, and I just think about it all the time. Insecurity is often tied to jealousy. Why is this person selling more books than me? Why does this person have more downloads than me? Why is their company, church, organization bigger than the one that I lead? And Andy, it's just such a powerful little line, but he just says, look, celebrate what God has given others. Leverage what God has given you.
Yeah.
So when someone's leading something bigger, better, they're stronger, faster, smarter, you just go, God, thank you for making them that way. And here's my little thing. And help me to be a really good steward of that. And so I think for insecurity, because I've been okay letting stuff go, because I've been all right, like going, yeah, I don't need to play in that space. And I've kind of narrowed my world a little bit to my strengths, my real strengths relationally and professionally. I'm okay. And I don't really struggle with FOMO. Like, if someone hits a New York Times list and I don't, it's great. Good for them. If someone's selling more books than I am, that's great. I just want to help the people who, read my book. Like, that's okay. But you have to become secure to be able to do that. And I think that's in large measure a spiritual journey as well.
To me, it's a spiritual, it's a healthy, it's a wisdom gaining lesson as an Enneagram 8 as well. It's been part of my personal journey, is just finding out, all right, this is who I am. I have a few giftedness. I'm good there, as opposed to feeling like I have to find this perfect spot that everyone else wants me to be. I was listening to a podcast that released today. Jenny Catrone released this, and it was about delegation. It was so good. And there was this last question she shared, and I think ties into this exactly. Are you more concerned about your image or helping others grow? And I think in this idea, as we're talking about in leadership and burning out and insecurity and delegation, if we stop and say, all right, Carey, your role is XYZ. That's all it is. And how can you help others grow? It isn't Carey doing everything. It is, how can I work with others through that process and that delegation and being secure enough to say, I'm only here to do one thing. That's it. Everyone else, the reason you're here is because I can't do those things nearly as well as you. And releasing that responsibility, feeling like because it's the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast that you had to do everything. And it's like, no.
Well, and you work a lot with John Maxwell's content and everything. And I love, one of my favorite books he's ever written is The 5 Levels of Leadership. And level 4 is people development.
Yep.
And the older I've gotten, the more I kind of realize one of the greatest things I can do is bring out the best in other people.
Yes.
Some of that is not trying to be, I have somebody who's really good at a podcast. My lane is so narrow in the podcast. It's like recruit guests and do good interviews. Like that's about it. That's all I do. The team does the rest and they make sure it gets out there. But I'm not going to try to be the producer. I'm not going to try to be the manager. I'm not going to try, like my lane is pretty narrow. And when you do that, you realize that the things that you're not good at, God has gifted other people to be able to do. And then my job is to really let them run in that lane and not interfere and support them and give them the resources and the tools that they need. And then everyone wins. Yeah. I'm happy doing my job. They love doing their job. We reach more people. Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest lessons that I've kind of talked about and learned with John to this point is the greatest way that you can add value to someone else is empowering to do something that they love to do and are great at. Mm. And it to me it ties into this whole delegation and insecurity and burnout. And maybe I'm part of the 7. I don't know. I know when my rubber band gets stretched. I know when I have a little bit too much on my plate, and I can recognize I'm like, oh, okay, I got to narrow back in. I had a year where God really spoke to me, and I read the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. Yeah. I read, Focus. It was about, hey, you have too much going on. But I think part of that is being okay saying, hey, Carey, you're great at this. Dude, take it. I don't need to control it because right. it's I know as part of a team and thinking about my experience in sports, dude, that's when we're all great. If I try to be, the basketball center and the point guard and the shooting guard, as much as that's an enviable person that can do all that, you can't play all the positions. And that's where I find this idea.
You're also not going to win a world championship.
No, not like the Raptors did, right? You're still living on that,
right.
I'm guessing. I'm hoping you are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, if I followed sports, I would be. I'm not a sports guy. That's another thing, too. People are like, how do you produce so much content? You wouldn't believe what I don't do. Like, I don't really track with sports. I haven't watched a lot of classic movies. Like, my life's pretty narrow, but I'm actually having a lot of fun. And it's okay. Like, I don't have to keep up. I don't have to be the cool guy. I don't have to be the guy who knows everything about everything. And that's all right. I know a few things about something, and that's good. That
is a lesson I have learned as well. As I describe it, you're better off being the sharpest knife in the kitchen rather than all the utensils in the drawer. And that's how I envision it. So I want to take a last little deep dive because I think this is so fitting in our world of leadership today. So many, contact points in social media. You led a large church. You lead a very large community now. The rule of 150. And I'd love to know how this ties into this, again, idea of burnout. Because I think there could be
Dunbar's number? Yeah.
Well, yeah. The idea that thinking, okay, Carey, you lead this, think back when you were a pastor. It's like you knew more than 150 people that were key in your organization. How did you manage those relationships so that way person 151 through 250, who was still very vital to that organization, felt connected and that you weren't aloof to them, or you weren't, just I guess aloof to it or just not connected. So I'd love for you to discuss some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. So Robin Dunbar is a British evolutionary psychologist, and he has a theory which he bases both historically and on neuro research that basically human beings historically and today are capable of about 150 relationships. So when I stepped out of the lead pastor role at the church, we were probably 3,500 people called our church home. We'd have over 1,000 on the weekend, but about 3,500 people would say, yep, that's my home. Well, I do not have the capacity to learn 3,500 names, but I started when the church was like less than 40 people. So when you have 40 people, you can know everyone in your church. You know their dogs' names, their cats' names, you know their kids' names, you know their cousins' names, you know all that stuff. And so over 2 decades, we grew from that handful of people to where we are. How do you scale relationships like that? Dunbar says you can't do it beyond 150. And I think he's right. And the problem is he wrote his book, How Many Friends Can One Person Have, I think is the title, in 2010, just as social media was taking off. And he goes, social media is breaking down those boundaries. It's like, well, there isn't a single person listening to this podcast who has fewer than 150 contacts, followers, etc. on social, right? We all have more than that. And he goes, this is what's killing us, guys. So he looks back at history and realizes that the average medieval and ancient town village was about 150 people or less. So you knew the blacksmith and the cobbler and the baker and all those people, and you knew them by name. And he says that hasn't changed. That is hardwired into our design as humans. Like neurologically, emotionally, we can't process more than that. Then he breaks that 150 down. He says you got about 10 to 15 people in that 150 that are truly friends, people that you're generally caught up with, you see on a semi-regular basis, and 3 to 5, you have a capacity of 3 to 5 best friends, where these are people, you know everything about them, they know everything about you, you talk every day or every other day, and that's about it. And he goes, that's all you can have. Now, what do you do when you live in a digital universe where, we connect with over a million, like millions of leaders a year. Like, how does that work? And the answer is I can't. So you have to scale it. And what I would suggest is you start to prioritize relationships. And the people closest to you should get the quickest and the deepest response. So if you look at your phone and you have 28 unread emails, they're not all equal. One spam, so you can delete that without opening it. Another one is from someone that you met 5 years ago at a conference that you haven't heard from in a long time. Another one is from a friend, or take it to text messages. You know, if you've got your mom, your wife, and a couple of colleagues, and then somebody you haven't talked to in 2 years, we know that even though there are 5 equal text messages, you should probably talk to your wife first. Your mom shouldn't be too far behind. And that colleague, do you have to get back to that colleague right away? Probably not. Should have been an email. Could have waited until our next meeting. So what you have to do is start doing triage. And what a lot of people struggle with is now everywhere you go, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every platform you're on has an inbox. You used to have an email inbox. Now you got an inbox on Facebook, Instagram. You're getting messages everywhere, and we just feel inundated. And so the idea is to do some relational triage and try to figure out the depth of the relationship should determine the depth and the speed of the response. So who are your 3 to 5? Who are your 10 to 15? Talk to them when they text you. That guy from high school you haven't talked to in 15 years, he can wait. Or maybe you don't need to respond. I have inboxes that I don't use. And that's just a decision because of the volume of correspondence. Then eventually, if you have a public platform like I do, I always never understood people who I'll always answer my own email. Well, you start getting thousands of emails a week and you're like, okay, I can't do that anymore, or I won't do it. I'm choosing not to. So now I have staff who monitor that for me. And if I need to know about it, I will find out. And then my private inbox is actually very manageable. I spend less than 30 minutes a day on it. It's easy. So you gotta figure that out. And when you don't figure it out, you're overwhelmed all the time.
Absolutely.
By the way, since At Your Best released, iOS 15 came out and they did something I asked for in the book. I'm sure because they read the book. It has nothing to do. You now have focus modes. So you used to have Do Not Disturb. I've had my device on Do Not Disturb for years, but now you have focus modes. So when you're at work, you can block out everybody, but allow 5, 10, 15 people to ring through. When you're at home, you can flip it and let a different group of people ring through so that you can protect your family time. And you can customize it based on the time of day or where you are. So I would encourage people to take a look at that, because otherwise, every time you look at it, you have all those red badges on your phone and you're just overwhelmed all the time. You should shut those off, get rid of the notifications, only allow a handful of people to ring through at the right time in the right way. And, the world will function without you responding every 15 seconds to inbound messages.
I think that those are all challenges for people with a high level of responsibility. But I believe if you focus your responsibility to those relationships that deserve it the most, then it becomes real easy to filter through that. And to me, that's what
Yeah.
you've kind of, suggested, and I agree with. And that's one of the practices that I've had. And I've noticed that the recent update is you have those focuses. I've used those limits, and it's really helped. And so I thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that I hear, I feel, I sense, and I realize that relationships go like this. We have times where we ebb and flow, where we're growing in different places in life. And I know for say my wife or her counterparts or women that I work with, I tend to find that it's harder for them to understand that relationships are going to ebb and flow. And so in other words, those, 6 to 12 people that are important in your endeavor today are going to be maybe different in 6 months. But as you shared, I think it's so important to just accept that for what it is. And no, it doesn't mean you're cutting the person out of your life. It's just saying, hey, right now my focus is on these relationships for this reason. And it's just ebb and flow through that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've also realized, and this is kind of, sad, but I think a reality of just human life, is sometimes relationships are there for a season. Yeah. Like if you think about your closest 3 to 5, they're probably different than they were a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And because you moved or you moved on or your interest changed or whatever, and even your best friends sometimes morph over time, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's all right. Now, I really believe I think the longest friendships are the best. And we have some, multi-decade friendships that we wouldn't trade for anything. But yeah, you have to, your bandwidth is fixed.
Yeah. Well, and I would
like
even...
your dishwasher, right? You can only fit so many plates and cups into it, and then it's full.
Yeah.
And I promise you, your relational bandwidth can take a lot less than your dishwasher can.
I would probably gather that as well, no matter how big your dishwasher is. But to use that analogy as dishes, like you can have dishes in your cabinets that you love and appreciate that maybe you only fit a certain season, but it doesn't mean that you're going to throw them out in the trash instead of washing them. And,
good point.
I think that's how I look at some of these relationships and ideas. And I think that can, if you were feeling responsible to those, instead of saying, hey, you know what, I'm just going to set that aside because right now I need to focus on what I need to focus on. Going back to that, phone, you can toggle your phone on different focuses. And it doesn't mean that you've forgotten about those relationships. Just right now, it's not the place for it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying ignore everybody, but what I am saying is inbound, I was a minute late for this, which I hate being late, but my doorbell literally rang, and it was our postman. And he said, I got to see you to be able to deliver this. I'm like, okay. I said, you have my permission because we have couriers all day. But your phone is kind of like that. Mm-hmm. Like imagine that was somebody knocking at your door every time there was a text, every time there was an email, every time somebody liked something on social, every time somebody messaged you on Instagram, that was like a knock on your door. Like you wouldn't live. You would get a restraining order against all these people and tell them stay off my property and put up a gated fence and you're not allowed in and have security cameras. It's like, I need my peace and privacy. Leave me alone, people. I'm trying to sleep. But we have this device and we allow it to come into our lives and just interrupt us left, right, and center. And research shows that if you're interrupted once, it takes you about 25 minutes to refocus. So, one interruption in this conversation to really get your brain back to where it was before, 25 minutes. And as you know, if you're creative like I am, sometimes you're working on a really good idea, you get an interruption, and you go back to it, and you're like, now, what was I thinking about?
Gone.
And you can't remember.
It's gone.
Because you're human. And sometimes those ideas are just gone. So try to find distraction-free space.
Yeah. Well, Carey, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited about your book, At Your Best. I'm excited for it to be part of the Impact Driven Leader Book Club here later this year. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for spending time with myself and our audience today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Brad Lomenick for connecting us. And great shout out, great friend.
Thanks, Tyler.